Montana Territory, 1873. The wind had teeth that night. It bit at the wooden siding of Bear Rock Station, howling through cracks like a pack of hungry wolves. Snow lashed the platform in sideways gusts, blanketing the tracks in silence. The lantern above the station door flickered, barely clinging to life. Silas McCrae stepped down from his wagon, boots crunching over ice. A bear of a man, with shoulders like timber beams and a thick beard kissed with frost, he walked with the quiet weight of someone who carried the past on his back. His buffalo hide coat rippled in the gale. 35 years of scars, some seen, most not, lined his face like dried riverbeds. He came to pick up a shipment of oats delayed by snow. Just a chore. Nothing more. Then he saw her. A small figure hunched on the station bench, half buried beneath a torn shawl and drifting snow. She looked like a heap of rags until she stirred, ever so slightly, revealing the pale edge of a face, young, maybe 25. Lips blue, cheeks hollow. Silas stepped closer, his breath clouding in the frigid air. Her stomach swelled beneath the shawl. He froze. She was pregnant. Silas turned, eyes narrowing at the stationmaster, a wiry man in a threadbare coat sipping from a bottle to stay warm. "She get off the train?" Silas asked. The stationmaster shrugged. 2 nights ago. Southbound. No ticket out. Said she was waitin' on someone, but... He looked down. No one came. Nobody even asked. Silas said nothing. The woman's breath came shallow, each exhale a whisper against the storm. No bag. Just a cracked leather satchel beside her. The kind a traveling preacher might carry. He touched her wrist. Cold. Too cold. For a moment, he hesitated. Just a moment. Then he muttered, "Damn it all," and scooped her up with startling gentleness for a man his size. She didn't stir. The stationmaster blinked. "You talking her?" Silas shot him a look. "She ain't staying here." He carried her across the platform like glass. Snow swirled around them in a frenzy. As he laid her carefully into the back of the wagon, wrapping her in extra blankets, a few locals peeked through the station's windows. No one stepped out. No one offered help. He cracked the reins, and the wagon groaned into motion. The horses pulled them into the storm, hooves muffled beneath heavy snow. The trail to his ranch carved through frozen pines and hills glazed in ice. Night was a black curtain, broken only by the glow of his lantern. The woman stirred now and again, a breath, a wordless moan, then silence. Silas glanced back often. "I don't know your name," he said to the unconscious figure. "But I reckon you didn't come here to die." Hours passed. When the snow grew too thick and the horses stumbled from exhaustion, he pulled the wagon off the trail near a cliffside outcrop. A place he'd camped once, long ago, when he and Ruth used to ride out just for the sky. He built a fire beneath a rocky ledge, stacking dry pine wood and striking a flint until the spark caught. The wind still hissed, but the fire pushed it back. He lifted the woman again and laid her close to the flames. She moaned softly. Eyes fluttered. For a second she saw him, shadowed against the firelight like something from a fever dream. "You're safe now," Silas said, as if he believed it himself. Her lips moved. No sound came. He gave her water in a cup made from a hollowed-out horn. She drank like a dying animal. A little at a time. The fire snapped and spit. He sat beside her, wrapped in his coat, chewing jerky and thinking of his wife. Ruth had that same look the last time he held her, skin too pale, breath too soft. A stillborn child. A storm just like this. "I buried them in that same coat you're wearing," he muttered, mostly to the wind. She turned her head, eyes glazed. "Ruth," she murmured. Silas didn't answer. His jaw worked. "You ain't her," he said. "But maybe you're someone's." He slept with his rifle across his lap, ears tuned for wolves, or worse, men. Morning came dull and gray. The wind died, but the cold sharpened. He melted snow for coffee, fed the horses, checked her pulse. Stronger now. As he packed the fire out and hitched the horses, the woman opened her eyes fully for the first time. He saw their color, green like pine after rain. "You're safe," he said. She blinked, tried to sit up. "Easy," he added. "You've been out near 2 days." "Where?" her voice cracked. "Where am I?" "North of Bear Rock. My ranch is another 2 hours west." Her hands moved to her belly, protectively. "My baby." "Still kicking," he said gently. "You're lucky." She studied him. A man carved from earth and grief, but with eyes that spoke of something quieter. Something waiting. "I'm Rosalind," she said. "Silas." The road to the ranch was easier in daylight, though snowdrifts still caught the wagon wheels. He spoke little, but when he did, it was steady, descriptions of the hills, the river that ran black in spring, the horses he bred, the fences that needed fixing. She listened. At the ranch, nestled between 2 hills and flanked by a narrow stream, he helped her down, slow and careful. The log cabin loomed behind them, solid, smoke rising from its chimney like a promise. Inside, the warmth hit her like a wave. A fire burned in the stone hearth. Everything smelled of leather, pine, and something faintly sweet, dried apples perhaps. It wasn't grand, but it was clean, lived in, quiet. He guided her to a cot beside the fire. The main bed, she noticed, remained untouched. "Make yourself at home," he said. "Thank you," she whispered. Silas brought stew and bread. She ate like someone who hadn't trusted food in days. "I can work," she said suddenly. "I'm not. I won't be a burden." He raised an eyebrow. "Didn't say you were. People always think." "People don't live here," he interrupted. "Just me. And now you." They didn't speak of what had brought her here. Not yet. But in the silence, something passed between them, not understanding exactly, but permission. Permission to exist beside each other, wounded and uncertain. That night she couldn't sleep. She stared into the fire, one hand on her belly, the other clenching the quilt. Silas noticed. "You're safe here," he said again. "No one knows you're here. And I don't talk to folks much." She nodded slowly. "He'll come looking." Silas's eyes narrowed. "The father." Rosalind's face darkened. "He's not a father. He's a hunter. I ran when I had the chance. I thought I'd make it west, find work. Start fresh." Her voice cracked. "Didn't expect the snow." Silas leaned back, eyes fixed on the flames. "You got away. That counts for something." "I don't want him near my baby," she said. "Ever." "He won't be," he replied, his tone like stone. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind began to rise again, but inside the walls of the old cabin, the quiet held. As Rosalind's eyes finally closed, Silas looked at her sleeping form. He didn't know what God intended when he put her on that bench 2 nights ago. But for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel so heavy. And maybe, just maybe, something new had stepped out of the snow. Rosalind woke to the smell of cedar smoke and the soft creak of floorboards. The morning light filtered in through frosted windows, casting long gold lines across the cabin floor. For a few seconds, she didn't know where she was. Then her hand went to her belly, felt the baby shift, and it all came rushing back. The storm, the station, the man with the sad eyes. She turned her head. Silas sat in a wooden chair by the hearth, whittling something with a knife. His boots were muddy, his sleeves rolled, forearms thick with old scars and fresh calluses. He didn't look up right away, just kept working the wood with slow precision. The fire popped and hissed behind him. "You slept long," he said without turning. Rosalind sat up slowly. The warmth of the cabin wrapped around her like a wool blanket. Her limbs still felt heavy, but stronger than before. "How long?" 3 days, he answered. "Mostly unconscious the first one. You've had broth, water. Baby's still active." She nodded, grateful but unsure how to say it. Her throat tightened. "You don't owe me anything," he added, voice low. That stilled her. Kindness without demand. It made her wary and thankful at once. Silas stood, placing the carving, an unfinished horse, on the table. You hungry for real food? She nodded. He dished up a thick stew from the pot hanging in the hearth. Meat, potatoes, and carrots softened into a rich broth. She held the warm bowl like it might disappear. The first bite made her eyes sting. It was simple, but it tasted like home, or what she imagined a home might feel like. They ate in silence, the only sound the fire and the spoon against the bowl. She glanced up once to find him watching her, not unkindly, just curious, as though trying to solve a puzzle without touching the pieces. He finally spoke. You said someone might come looking. Rosalind's jaw tensed. She set her bowl down carefully, swallowed hard. His name's Everett Coyle. He's not the father, not really. Just the man who claimed me after my parents died. Called it a courtship. Turned out it was ownership. Silas leaned back in his chair. His face remained calm, but his eyes darkened. When I found out I was pregnant, she continued, I knew what he'd do. He always said he'd raise no bastard, and I'd raise nothing of my own. I ran. Took a train with the last of the money I had. I didn't think the snow would hit that fast. Silas took a long breath. You got away. That's what matters. For now, she said. If he's got any sense, he'll stay where he is. He doesn't, she said. He has pride. And a shotgun. That hung in the air for a while. Outside, the wind picked up again, slapping against the shutters. The world beyond the cabin seemed vast and unknowable. But inside, the space felt oddly safe. A pocket of warmth carved from winter. Over the next week, Rosalind grew stronger. She moved more, took short walks around the room, sometimes ventured out to the porch wrapped in layers. Silas stayed nearby, never hovering, always ready. She learned the rhythms of his life. How he rose before dawn to check the animals, how he never whistled but hummed quietly when working, how he sat by the hearth at night and carved animals he never quite finished. She began to help. Just little things. Washing dishes, folding linens, stirring the stew. He didn't stop her. In fact, he seemed to ease when she joined the rhythm. The silence between them grew more companionable, less fragile. One afternoon, she was peeling potatoes when she asked, Why do you live out here alone? Silas paused from where he was mending a saddle strap. His jaw worked as though chewing words. My wife died, he said finally. 3 winters ago. Child too. Buried him out back beneath the old pine. Rosalind looked down at the knife in her hand. I'm sorry. He nodded once. We were married 9 years. Tried for children the whole time. Never could. When it finally happened, he trailed off. The doctor couldn't get here in time. Her throat tightened. She knew that kind of pain. Not the exact shape of it, but the echo. She had a name? Rosalind asked. Ruth. A silence followed, not cold, but heavy with respect. Rosalind whispered it to herself. Ruth. A name etched into the beams of this house. That night, as a new storm rolled in, Silas surprised her by setting a wrapped bundle beside her place at the hearth. She opened it. Inside, a carved horse, sanded smooth, the first one he'd ever finished. She ran her fingers along the grain. For the baby, he said. When it comes. She couldn't speak. Just smiled, and it reached further into her chest than anything had in years. The storm blew for 2 more days. Snow stacked high against the windows. Trees bowed under weight. At night, they shared stories by firelight. Rosalind told him about the summers she'd spent on her family's small orchard in Kansas, peach trees that smelled like honey when the wind blew south. He told her about the war, about friends who never made it home, about how silence feels heavier when you survive. They laughed sometimes too. Once, over a burned skillet of cornbread neither of them would admit was inedible. Once when the goat got into the kitchen and knocked over a sack of flour. Those small, absurd moments chipped away at the fortress around them. Rosalind began sewing again, using scraps from old shirts. Silas repaired the broken cradle that had sat untouched in the loft. He didn't say why. She didn't ask. One morning, she stood on the porch watching the sunlight melt a trail through the snow. She could hear the horses down at the corral. Silas joined her, coffee steaming in his tin cup. "You ever think of leaving this place?" she asked softly. He took a sip. "Sometimes. But then I remember, it ain't the place that's haunted. It's me." She looked at him, really looked. There was kindness in him, wrapped in rough bark. Grief, yes, but also a gentleness he didn't seem to know he had. A man like Silas didn't pretend. He carried what he carried. She reached out and touched his arm, just a brush of fingers. He didn't flinch. That night, she woke from a nightmare. Everett's voice, his shadow. She bolted upright, gasping. The cabin was dark, the fire low. Silas was already at her side. "It's all right," he said, kneeling. "You're here." "He's not." She leaned into him without thinking. His arms wrapped around her, careful, warm. The smell of smoke and pine on his coat. The weight of someone who wouldn't let go. She cried, quietly, into his shoulder. When she finally pulled back, she looked up at him. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Silas blinked. "Because someone should have been, a long time ago." She pressed her forehead to his chest. "I don't want to be alone anymore." "You're not," he said. They didn't speak of what that moment meant, but it hung in the space between them like a thread, waiting to be pulled. The snow eased the next day. The sun peeked through clouds like a promise. Birds called from the trees again. The world, it seemed, hadn't ended after all. And inside the cabin, something else had begun. Rosalind's cry pierced the cold dawn like a blade. Silas jolted awake, bare feet on the cabin floor in an instant. He rushed to the corner where she sat hunched, both hands gripping her belly. Sweat soaked her nightdress, and her face was pale as parchment. "It's too soon," she gasped, breath ragged. "It's not time." Silas was already gathering cloths, stoking the fire, bringing water to a boil. The world narrowed to the cabin walls and the life between them. Snow still clung to the window edges, but spring had started its slow thaw. Outside, the ground turned soft and muddy, but inside, everything was sharp, immediate, terrifying. He knelt beside her. "Look at me," he said, voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "You can do this." Her eyes met his, wild and filled with pain. Then she nodded. Just once. The labor came fast. Faster than it should have. Her screams echoed off the log walls. Silas held her hand when she gripped nothing. He whispered words he hadn't said in years. Prayers, curses, memories. The same floorboards where Ruth had slipped away now bore Rosalind's fight to bring something into the world instead of losing it. Hours passed in a blur. Steam rose from the kettle. Cloths soaked red and were tossed away. Rosalind cried out until her voice cracked, then fell silent except for hoarse breathing. Silas feared the worst. Then it happened. A thin, wet cry, high and raw and alive. Silas blinked. Rosalind slumped backward, barely conscious, tears streaming down her face. He held the child in trembling hands. A boy. Eyes shut tight. Face red and angry at the cold. Breathing. Living. "You did it," he whispered to her. She smiled, faint and beautiful, and whispered, "Samuel." The name clung to the air like smoke. He nodded, heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The baby nursed quietly beside the fire. Silas wrapped Rosalind in blankets, tucked the boy to her chest, then stepped outside into the sharp air to steady himself. He breathed deep. The land was quiet, watching. He heard the sound of hooves before he saw them. 3 riders approached from the tree line, slow and easy. One wore a gray coat with a rusted buckle, Confederate surplus, a decade too late. Another chewed a stick of straw, rifle across his saddle. But it was the third that made Silas reach instinctively for the rifle leaning beside the door. Everett Coyle. His face was thinner than Rosalind's story suggested, eyes beady beneath a wide hat. But the cruelty was unmistakable. His smile wasn't wide. It was a slit like a wound that hadn't healed right. Silas didn't move. The men reined in just short of the porch. "Afternoon," Everett said, voice slick as oil. Heard tell a woman came up this way. Pretty, pregnant, far from home. You wouldn't have seen such a soul, would you? Silas studied him. Can't say I have. Everett chuckled. See, that's funny. I was told otherwise. Fellow at Bear Rock Station said a big rancher took her in. And I don't see many ranchers bigger'n you. Silas's jaw tightened. If I had company, it wouldn't concern a man like you. The straw chewer shifted in his saddle. The one in gray spat into the snow. Everett's voice lost its friendliness. She's carrying something that belongs to me. Silas stepped forward. She ain't property. She was promised, Everett hissed. Ain't about her. It's about what's mine. The boy. There is no boy, Silas lied. Everett looked past him, eyes narrowing toward the smoke curling from the chimney. I want to speak to her. Silas didn't blink. No. Something in his tone made the other men straighten. I don't think you understand, Everett said. I've got papers. Legal ones. Judge signed 'em. She's mine by contract. Silas finally raised the rifle. Not aimed, but lifted enough to send a message. You get off my land, he said, voice iron. And you stay off. The man in gray touched the hilt of his knife. Everett raised a hand to stop him. All right, Everett said slowly. We'll be back tomorrow. Maybe you'll think different. They turned and rode off, disappearing into the trees. Silas stood still for several seconds after, listening to the silence that followed them. When he went back inside, Rosalind looked up. She knew. He's here, isn't he? Silas nodded. He'll come back. She looked down at Samuel, asleep against her chest. He'll take him from me. He'll kill me if he thinks I'll stop him. No, Silas said. He won't. We should run. He'd track us. You can't travel with a newborn. Not through that forest. Not yet. Rosalind bit her lip. What do we do? Silas stared into the fire for a long time. We hold our ground. That night, he pulled a trunk from beneath the floorboards. Inside, a worn Union jacket, medals wrapped in cloth, a Colt pistol, and ammunition he hadn't touched in years. He loaded shells with methodical precision. Then he rode to the edge of his land. At a half-buried stone, he whistled once, short and sharp. An hour later, a figure stepped out from the trees. Tall, broad-shouldered, draped in worn leather and furs. A face lined like cracked earth. Long black hair tied back with sinew. Wicasa. They spoke little. They never had to. Years ago, they fought together against raiders near Fort Peck. Since then, Wicasa had become a ghost, part hunter, part myth. But when Silas needed eyes sharper than his own, Wicasa answered. Back at the ranch, Rosalind met Wicasa with wary eyes, but he merely nodded at her, then knelt to brush his fingers gently against Samuel's cheek. He said something in Lakota under his breath. Is he helping us? Rosalind asked. Silas nodded. He sees what we don't. The day passed with tense silence. Wicasa vanished into the trees. Silas built traps along the fence line, tripwires, sharpened stakes, old tricks from an old war. He moved Rosalind and Samuel into the root cellar and gave her a revolver. Don't aim unless you mean it, he said. I won't miss, she replied. When night came, Silas waited on the porch with his rifle, breath steaming in the dark. They came just after midnight. No greetings this time. No talk. Just the sound of hooves, then gunfire. Silas fired first, dropped the man in gray before he reached the gate. The second man tried to flank him, but a shadow moved in the trees. Wicasa's arrow caught him in the throat before he fired. Everett charged straight up the hill like a man possessed. Screaming Rosalind's name, shotgun raised. Silas ducked behind the post, returned fire, clipped Everett's shoulder. The shotgun blasted into the porch rail, with splinters flying. Silas advanced, steps slow and unflinching. Everett stumbled backward, bleeding, breathing ragged. You can't keep her, he shouted. You think a whore and her bastard make you a man again? Silas stopped 10 feet away, rifle leveled. They make me whole. Everett raised his shotgun again. One shot rang out. clean. Final. He collapsed in the snow. Silas lowered his weapon. Wicasa appeared a moment later, bow still in hand. They exchanged a glance. Nothing said, everything understood. Dawn broke with blood on the trail and smoke rising from a fire they never let spread. When Silas opened the cellar door, Rosalind stood holding Samuel close. Her eyes met his, wide, terrified, and then soft with recognition. She stepped into the light, into his arms, and held him tightly. The danger had passed. But nothing would be the same again. The land was quiet again. Too quiet. The sun rose slow and pale above the mountains, casting a light that looked more like memory than morning. The snow had begun to melt in patches, revealing frozen earth beneath, dark, cracked, waiting. Smoke still curled from the cabin's chimney, but it drifted straighter now, undisturbed by gunfire or fear. Silas stood at the edge of the pasture, one hand resting on the fence he'd rebuilt just last spring. His knuckles were still raw. Blood had dried in the creases of his fingers. He watched the horses graze in the thawing field and listened, really listened, to the silence. It no longer screamed. Behind him, the door creaked open. Rosalind stepped out, holding Samuel tight against her chest, swaddled in the thick red quilt Ruth once sewed. The baby made small sounds, fists twitching like sapling branches in the breeze. "He slept through the night," she said softly. Silas nodded, eyes still on the pasture. "First time." He turned to her, the morning light catching in his beard, silver lining the dark. "He knows he's safe now." Rosalind studied him. He looked older somehow, not just tired, but changed. The violence had taken something from him, yet left something deeper in its place. A hollow no longer empty. "He saved us," she whispered, brushing a hand over Samuel's brow. "No," Silas replied, voice low. "You saved me." He stepped toward her, slow, deliberate. No rush. No uncertainty. She didn't flinch when his hand touched her cheek. "I spent years thinking there'd never be more than this land," he said. "That I'd walk it alone till I turned to dust." Her breath caught. She leaned into his palm, her eyes shimmering. "But then you showed up," he continued. "And you brought something back I didn't even know I'd lost." Rosalind smiled through the tears rising in her eyes. "Hope. Hope," he said. "And a future." He leaned in and kissed her, soft, unhurried, honest. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a promise. It was a beginning. The wedding was quiet. They stood beneath the pine that shaded Ruth's grave. Wicasa acted as witness, saying nothing but offering a nod of approval. Rosalind wore a dress stitched from linen sheet. Silas shaved, awkwardly, cutting himself once at the chin. Samuel gurgled through most of the ceremony, swaddled in Wicasa's arms. When Rosalind said, "I do," she didn't whisper it. She said it like she meant it, with her spine straight and voice strong. Silas only said her name before he said the words. That alone nearly broke her. They buried Everett Coyle on the northern ridge, far from the house. Wicasa said it was the only mercy the man had earned. Rosalind didn't attend. Silas did, alone, and didn't mark the grave. Some things didn't need remembering. Weeks passed. The thaw gave way to green. Streams began to babble again. The goats got loose twice. One of the cows dropped a calf. Rosalind laughed when Silas tried to help and got kicked for his trouble. Samuel grew stronger, louder, and more curious each day. His eyes were sharp and searching, always on the move. Rosalind called him Little Wind, because nothing seemed to stop him. One morning, Rosalind found Silas sanding an old cradle in the workshop. The same one he'd once buried beneath blankets after Ruth passed. She leaned against the doorway, watching. "You could have thrown that out." "I thought about it," he said, not looking up. "But then I realized it wasn't meant to be buried. Just waiting." She walked over, ran her hand along the edge. The wood was smooth now, lined with carvings of horses and pine trees. There were initials burned into the base, S+C. "I didn't want to forget her," Rosalind said gently. "I never will." Silas paused. "You don't have to become her." That's not why he stopped, sighed. You're not a replacement. I know. They stood in silence for a while. Then Rosalind said, I don't want to keep running. Not anymore. You're not. But the world won't stop chasing us. There will be men like him again. People who want to take what they think they're owed. Silas turned to her. Then we stand. Together. They made plans. Silas expanded the southern fence line. Rosalind took over the book. She learned to shoot properly. Better than him, he joked, and he taught her how to ride without fear. Wicasa stayed for a while, then vanished into the hills as quietly as he came, leaving behind a bundle of gifts, furs, herbs, and a carved rattle for Samuel. One night, a storm rolled in, not snow this time, but thunder and wild summer rain. The wind tore through the trees like a warning. Silas lay awake, listening. Rosalind sat up in bed. What is it? He slipped from beneath the blankets, grabbed the rifle by instinct. I don't know. The door banged once, then twice. Silas moved like a shadow, pressing his back against the wall. Rosalind cradled Samuel and crouched beside the hearth. A voice called out, muffled in the downpour. McCrae. It wasn't a threat. Silas opened the door to find a boy, 16 maybe, soaked to the bone, riding a half-lame horse. Bandits, he gasped. 2 miles east. Burned out the Wilkins place. Headed this way. Rosalind stood, face calm but hard. Silas turned to her. We don't have time to run. We're not running, she said. They prepared quickly. Silas mounted his stallion, rifle across his lap. Rosalind helped the boy inside, gave him dry clothes and bread. Then she stood on the porch, holding Samuel, watching her husband disappear into the storm with fury in his heart and purpose in his bones. By dawn, the danger had passed. 3 men lay in the mud by the east trail. One still breathing. Silas brought him back, dragging him by the collar. Rosalind met his eyes, expression unreadable. You ride out here, Silas growled at the wounded man. You better be sure you're the only wolves in the trees. The man spat blood, said nothing. Rosalind stepped forward, baby in one arm, rifle in the other. Next time you come, she said coldly, I won't ask questions before I shoot. The message was received. They sent him away, broken and bleeding, to tell the others that Bear Rock was no longer a place for thieves or men who thought kindness meant weakness. Months passed. The valley turned golden with late summer. The first leaves began to shift orange. One morning, Silas sat on the porch with Samuel asleep against his chest. Rosalind was hanging linens on the line, the sun catching in her hair. He watched her for a long while, the way her hands moved with calm precision, the way she hummed softly as she worked. He'd loved once before and lost. He'd buried that love thinking nothing would ever grow from that soil again. But here he was, roots deeper than ever. A woman who saw him not as something broken, but as someone whole. A son who carried his name, and maybe more than that, his fight. Rosalind looked over and caught him staring. What? Nothing, he said, smiling. Everything. She came over, placed a gentle kiss on his forehead, then on Samuel's. You planning on keeping me around? I'm hoping you'll stay forever. We'll see, she teased, then sat beside him. They didn't speak for a while. Just listened to the breeze rustling the pines, to the sound of a new life unfolding, uneasy, unpredictable, but entirely theirs. And in that stillness, Silas McCrae understood something he never had before. Some storms don't end. But if you build something strong enough, rooted deep enough, you don't have to run from them anymore. You just face them together. And sometimes you win. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and share it with someone who believes in love, redemption, and second chances. Comment below, what would you have done in Silas or Rosalind's place? And if you want more powerful stories like this, make sure to subscribe.